Good afternoon. Moadim L'Simcha. It's Monday, April 6th. I'm Laura Cornfield, and this is IBA News, broadcasting from Jerusalem. U.S. President Barack Obama says that he understands the Israeli fears regarding the Iranian nuclear framework agreement and vowed that he has our backs. Obama defended the deal in a White House interview with the New York Times reporter Thomas Friedman.
Israel has a right to defend itself. And the Israeli people are right to be afraid of the environment that they're in right now.
I mean, they're going to watch this video. What would you say to them to persuade them that this is a deal worth pursuing?
Well, what I'd say to them is this. You have every right to be concerned about Iran. This is a regime that at the highest levels has expressed the desire to destroy Israel, that has denied the Holocaust, that has expressed venomous anti-Semitic ideas, and is a big country with a big population and has a sophisticated military. So Israel is right to be concerned about Iran, and they should be absolutely concerned that Iran doesn't get a nuclear weapon. What I would say to the Israeli people is, however, that there is no formula, there is no option to prevent Iran from getting a nuclear weapon that will be more effective than the diplomatic initiative and framework that we put forward. And that's demonstrable. We know that a military strike or a series of military strikes can set back Iran's nuclear program for a period of time, but almost certainly will prompt Iran to rush towards a bomb, will provide an excuse for hardliners inside of Iran to say, this is what happens when you don't have a nuclear weapon. America attacks. We know that if we do nothing other than just maintain sanctions, that they will continue with the building of their nuclear infrastructure and will have less insight into what exactly is happening. And so this may not be optimal. You know, in a perfect world, Iran would say, we won't have any nuclear infrastructure at all. But what we know is that this has become a matter of pride and nationalism for Iran. Even those who we consider moderates and reformers are supportive of some nuclear program inside of Iran. And given that they will not capitulate completely, given that they can't meet the threshold that Prime Minister Netanyahu sets forth, there are no Iranian leaders who would do that.
Including recognizing Israel, which he's now asked for.
And given the fact that this is a country that withstood an 8-year war and 1 million people dead, so they've shown themselves willing, I think, to endure hardship when they consider it a point of national pride or, in some cases, national survival. For us to examine those options and say to ourselves, you know what, if we can have vigorous inspections, unprecedented, and we know at every point along their nuclear chain exactly what they're doing, and that lasts for 20 years, and for the first 10 years their program is not just frozen but effectively rolled back to a large degree. And we know that even if they wanted to cheat, we would have at least a year before, which is about 3 times longer than we'd have right now, and we would have insights into their programs that we've never had before. In that circumstance, the notion that we wouldn't take that deal right now and that would not be in Israel's interest is simply incorrect. And look, I have to respect the fears that the Israeli people have. And I understand that Prime Minister Netanyahu is expressing the deep-rooted concerns that a lot of the Israeli population feel about this. But what I can say to them is, number one, this is our best bet by far to make sure Iran doesn't get a nuclear weapon. And number two, what we will be doing even as we enter into this deal is sending a very clear message to the Iranians and to the entire region that if anybody messes with Israel, America will be there.
Leading Republican senators are making it clear that they will attempt to block the agreement. The chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee vowed to continue economic sanctions while the agreement is being studied. Senator Lindsey Graham says that a deal must be pushed off until Obama is out of office.
It's the best deal he could get, but the question is Barack Obama the best person to deal with the Iranians, given his miserable foreign policy failure? Does anybody really believe the Iranians will take the billions of dollars that we're about to give them and build hospitals and schools? How many centrifuges should a nation have whose military leadership called for the destruction of Israel during the negotiations? How many centrifuges should a nation have who is still the largest sponsor of state terrorism? Does anybody in their right mind believe that Iran's behavior is going to change because you give them more money and more centrifuges to eventually make a bomb? And what will the Arabs do in response to this deal? This deal doesn't dismantle one centrifuge, it doesn't close one site, and I believe there's a better deal. I don't want a war, but at the end of the day, I don't want to give Iran the tools and the capability to continue to destroy the Mideast and one day attack us by building bigger missiles. And until they say they will not destroy the state of Israel, until they stop their provocative behavior, I think we'd be nuts to give them more money and more capability.
Will your committee actually vote on your bill on April 14th, and will you insist on congressional review?
Absolutely, Chris. Again, I think everyone would say that the congressionally mandated sanctions are what helped in a strong way get Iran to the table. And so certainly we should approve this deal. We should approve what we see prior to those being lifted. And look, I've talked to the negotiators. No one has said that Congress weighing in would have any effect on this deal. As a matter of fact, what we know is just quite the contrary. We know that during the negotiations, the fact that Congress was likely to weigh in was something that the administration, the other Western countries were able to use to ensure that this deal isn't worse than it is. So the fact that they knew that Congress was going to weigh in was helpful in the negotiations. Certainly the American people want to know that someone is teasing out all of the details, especially as they see Iran reporting one thing in their country and the U.S. something else here. So look, this is a place for sober and thoughtful people to dig in. Look, I want to see a negotiated agreement. I know that a lot of water has to go under the bridge over the next 90 days, and it's very important that Congress is in the middle of this, understanding, teasing out, asking those important questions, just like the ones that you've begun to ask this morning.
Prime Minister Netanyahu did his own American media blitz, mincing no words in his continuing opposition to the framework nuclear agreement with Iran.
I'm not trying to kill any deal. I'm trying to kill a bad deal. And you say it's a historic decision, a historic deal. It could be a historically bad deal because it leaves the preeminent terrorist state of our time with a vast nuclear infrastructure. Remember, not one centrifuge is destroyed. Thousands of centrifuges will be left spinning uranium. Not a single facility, including underground facilities, nuclear facilities, is being shut down. This is a deal that leaves Iran with the capacity to produce the material for many, many nuclear bombs, and it does so by lifting the sanctions pretty much up front. So Iran will have billions of dollars flowing to its coffers, not for schools or hospitals or roads, but to pump up its worldwide terror machine and its military machine, which is busy conquering the Middle East as we speak. The preeminent terrorist state of our time should not have access to a vast nuclear capability that will ultimately give them nuclear weapons. That's a concern for Israel, for the region, for the peace of the world. Chuck, I'm the only Israeli left standing who never talks about our military option. But I will say this, I prefer a diplomatic solution. You know why? Because for any military option, the country that will pay the biggest price is always Israel. So we want a diplomatic solution, but a good one that rolls back Iran's nuclear infrastructure, and one that ties the final lifting of restrictions on Iran's nuclear program with the change of Iran's behavior, namely that they stop their aggression in the region, that they stop their worldwide terrorism, and that they stop calling and working for the annihilation of Israel.
Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas is threatening to take action against Israel in the International Criminal Court in The Hague if Israel doesn't retract its withholding of funds to pay back Palestinian debts to Israeli utilities. Abbas also drew attention to the plight of Palestinian refugees under siege in the Yarmouk camp on the outskirts of Damascus. We get more in this report from IBA's Margot Dudkevich.
Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas has rejected Israel's partial payment of tax funds after Jerusalem deducted a portion of the tax revenues to pay off the Palestinian debts for unpaid utility bills. Speaking in Ramallah yesterday, Abbas called on Israel to transfer the entire sum of money, saying failure to do so will leave the Palestinians no alternative but to approach the International Criminal Court in The Hague. An official in Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's office said the millions of dollars held back were to pay for debts incurred by the Palestinian Authority for unpaid electricity, water and health bills. The official said Israel will be willing to return the funds sent back by Abbas to the Palestinian Authority whenever it wishes. Just 2 months ago, Israel's electricity board estimated the Palestinians owed some $492 million. For 3 months, Israel froze tax revenues amounting to some $400 million collected for the Palestinian Authority, after the Palestinian leadership in December sought membership at the ICC, a move that would pave the way for war crime charges to be filed against Israel. The Palestinians received membership status at the court on April 1st. Abbas also took the opportunity yesterday to raise the plight of Palestinian refugees in Syria in the Yarmouk camp, located on the outskirts of Damascus, where fierce fighting has caused thousands of Palestinians to flee. And thousands of Palestinian refugees are still trapped inside the camp, caught in the midst of intense gun battles between Syrian army forces, Palestinian gunmen and Islamic State terrorists, who have reportedly seized control of some 90% of the camp since their entry on April 1st. The United Nations has expressed concern for the well-being of the camp residents and said negotiations are underway with the Syrian government to allow assistance inside the camp.
It's never been as grave and desperate as it is now in Yarmouk camp. It is a place that has been besieged for 2 years, where about 18,000 people have been surviving on very minimal assistance for a long time, and now, with the fighting intensifying, their lives are in immediate danger. I think here not only that there are the 18,000 civilians, but there are 3,500 children among them. And with the intensity of the confrontations, our call has been for parties to immediately suspend military operations that put civilians in danger.
Ever since the start of the Syria civil war, camp residents have had to contend with an ongoing Syrian government siege, dwindling food and medical supplies, and daily gun battles in the streets between pro- and anti-Syrian government forces. Now they're confronted with Islamic State terrorists and efforts by rebel groups to oust them. Margot Dudkevich, IBA News.
4 days after faking his own disappearance, Niv Ashraf and his friend Eran Nagakar, both from Beersheba, were conditionally released from prison by the Jerusalem Magistrates Court. Suspected of faking an abduction, the two friends got the security establishment to mobilize after Nagakar told police that his friend Ashraf had apparently been kidnapped in the West Bank. The two men are barred from leaving the country or entering Judea and Samaria and were ordered to pay bail of 5,000 shekels. The state prosecutor is expected to charge Ashraf and Nagakar, both 22, with conspiracy to commit a crime, fabricating evidence, obstruction of justice, disturbing the peace, and perhaps a few more charges as yet undetermined. The search for Ashraf reportedly cost over 1 million shekels, with IDF soldiers, police, and Shin Bet officers all taking part. There are several theories and accounts going around of why Ashraf faked his kidnapping. They include trying to gain sympathy to win back his ex-girlfriend, evading loan sharks for gambling debts, hiding out to avoid extortion due to gambling winnings, and good old-fashioned stupidity. Every day a new kind of robot is born. Coming up is one that is able to put out fire below decks on ships by itself. IBA's Ari O'Sullivan brings us the story.
Meet the Safrir, the first autonomous robot designed to fight fires on ships. Well, our objectives for the demo on the Shadwell were to show that the robot could walk over what was a very uneven floor, that it could orient itself to the fire.
The Safria, which is in the final stages of development at Virginia Tech, was revealed by the Office of the U.S. Navy Research a few months ago. The prototype was first tested on this ship, the USS Shadwell, where the Navy drills fighting fires in ship holds. The test trained the two-legged robot to walk across rocking decks, identify a fire with special sensors, and extinguish it.
We have visible cameras on board the robot. We have something called a LiDAR, which is a rotating laser that gives the location of the points in the field of the view of the robot. And then lastly, we have stereoscopic thermal imaging cameras that the robot uses to detect and locate the position of a fire so they can suppress it.
The experiment also involved a small hovering drone, which moves through narrow ship holds autonomously and relays live images from optic and thermal cameras, which are able to see through the thick smoke. The mission of the drone is to locate the source of fire and direct the robot to it. The goal is to keep sailors from the smoke and fire, which can be deadly for any human.
We're working towards human-robot teams, what we call the hybrid force, humans and robots working together.
Aria O'Sullivan for IBA News.
Today was the day for the traditional priestly blessing, Birkat HaKohanim, at the Western Wall in Jerusalem. Thousands gathered for the Mass prayer, which takes place twice annually on the Passover and Sukkot holidays. The Kohanim, or priests, lead the communal prayers by chanting 3 consecutive verses of the Torah, one word at a time, in a special melody dating back to the Second Temple period. The Western Wall is a remnant of the compound of the Second Temple, built by King Herod and destroyed by the Roman Empire in 70 AD. Staying on the Passover theme, after nearly a century of matzah making, Streit's Matzah Factory in New York is relocating from their historical roots in the Lower East Side. IBA reporter Alexandra Jen has this story.
Streit's Matzah Factory in New York City is celebrating its very last Passover this week. Sadly, the historic Matzah Hub will soon shut down after 90 years of successful business in the heart of the Lower East Side, once home to the largest Jewish population in America. Thankfully, the operation is moving to its satellite factory in Menachie, New Jersey, just 13 miles away, where Streit's will continue to make its traditional Jewish products.
Being on the Lower East Side, although it's a part of our history and a part of our roots, it doesn't make as much business sense to be down here manufacturing in Manhattan.
From Aaron Streit to his great-grandsons, Aaron, and Adam, the family-owned business has thrived in the Lower East Side. The Streits have been manufacturing matzah here since 1925, when Aaron Streit Sr. and his son first opened shop. Now the 4th and 5th generations of the family still carry on the traditions of the past. But some of the traditions have proved inefficient in modern times. For example, today the matzah making equipment is larger, making it difficult to fit into the 4 converted tenement buildings that make up the factory. Perhaps the biggest challenge is the absence of a loading dock, requiring delivery trucks to line the increasingly congested streets of downtown to be loaded.
I'm 5th generation. If we want this to last another 5 generations, we need to make sure that we strengthen the company in order to remain relevant.
After years of offers from developers, the Streit's factory has finally decided to make the move to the New Jersey suburbs in June. The upcoming move makes this Passover a particularly special one for the family, as it will be the last time they celebrate in their original location.
I think with the closing of Streit's Matzah Factory, the Lower East Side is certainly losing a part of its history.
In local finance, the shekel remains the same in foreign currency trading, while shares were mixed in a shortened trading day on the Tel Aviv Stock Exchange. Here are the numbers. Turning to the weather, and temperatures are expected to rise tomorrow, making it warmer than normal for this time of the year. Here are the highs and lows for the next 24 hours at home and abroad. And that's all for this newscast. Please join us again tomorrow at the same time for more news and analysis from Israel and abroad. Until then, I'm Laura Cornfield wishing you Moadim L'Simcha. Have a great evening and shalom from Jerusalem.